And thank you so much. I am very excited for this session. It looks like those of you who are attending are as well. So we're very pleased to have Anna Lennon with us. She's the Associate Director of Student Leadership here at Duke, and she manages some very large-scale leadership programs. She does workshops. I'm sure she does a lot of other things that I'm unaware of. I don't know, Anna, if you want to add in anything else that falls under your purview at Duke before we get started?
Yeah, I manage the Penny Pilgrim George Women's Leadership Initiative, which is an annual cohort-based program for undergraduate students, which is how Jen and I are connected because she serves as a mentor in that program. I also am an advisor for our Interfraternity Council, which is a whole different boatload of coordinating and leadership, like skill stretching. And supervise our team who coordinate a whole lot of other wonderful leadership programs out of our office. So, yeah.
Yay. Well, we're really excited to have you here with us today, and I will let you take it away from here.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Jen, and thanks everyone for joining us. If you have questions, please do feel free to pop them in the chat. Jen will probably be able to see them easier than I can since I have the PowerPoint up and the screen sharing fun that we have all learned from Zoom these days and how that works. But a little bit of sort of goal setting for us so you know where we're headed during the session today. By the time we're done, you should be able to identify at least 2 leadership skills you already have that employers want, and be able to describe those 2 skills effectively on your resume or in an interview. You might get way more than 2, but we're going to set our bar at 2 for at least that many. A little bit of a roadmap of where we're going today. We are going to clearly define leadership just so we have some more solid concepts to talk about. It sounds simple enough on its own, but when you really dig into it, it can be a little bit unwieldy, and defining it will help us identify those skills that employers want more easily and help you see where you might have already practiced those if you're not aware, and then help you understand how to describe those really clearly, either in an interview setting or on a resume. So to start thinking about leadership defined, this is a definition that we use in our office, and this comes from a more current, forward-thinking, inclusive model of leadership called the social change model of leadership. If you ever want to Google and research that on your own, we also have resources on our website I'll share later about it. But this is what we're finding is a more modern version of leadership. Instead of talking about a hierarchical, top-down, position-titled version of leadership. So in this, it says leadership is a purposeful, collaborative, values-based process that results in positive social change. So I really want you to think through some of those words and pay attention to them as we go through the rest of this session. But purposeful, meaning that there's some end goal, there's something driving it. Leadership just doesn't exist for the sake of existing. It's collaborative, it's working with other people and engaging with them. Values-based, that there's something driving us towards that, as well as a process. Leadership is not a one and done, like, oh, okay, I got a title, so leadership is done, right? And then also towards that change, right? What you define as positive social change can vary by person, but leadership is towards a change. And this is a big debate we can have in lots of other spheres about what is leadership. But we talk about it going towards something, and that's important to consider when you want to reflect on what leadership experiences you have already. So to better understand this in our office, we also talk about it in 3 different parts. I'm going to break those down a little bit for you. And as we walk through them, try to think about where these things might show up in your life. So part 1 is the individual, really personal, yourself. What are you learning about yourself when you're practicing leadership? What are your traits, tendencies, and habits in that? For example, I am a very type A left-brained person, right? And so knowing that for me and how that shows up when I'm leading and working with others matters. What do you value, and how do you practice or live out those values? So dependability is an important value of mine. And so how do I do that when I'm working with others? How do I make sure I'm showing up when I say I'm going to and delivering on the things that I want to deliver on? Because that dependability is important to me. Then we want to consider the group as a way to think about leadership. How do you work with others and interact with them when you're in a group setting of some kind? How do you problem solve and compromise with those people? Because that inevitably has to happen in leadership when we're working with others. And then how do you motivate from any role? I already referenced that we talk about leadership a lot more these days as not being focused positionally, rather, or about having a title, but being about how you interact with others in a group and how you manage that. So thinking about how you motivate and connect with others from any role in your leadership. And then the third area is community. And so this one might vary a lot based on your work or your grad program and what you're doing, but how do you contribute to that greater good that we talk about so often? What are you doing for the larger community around you, and how do you create that change? So I'll hand this one over to Jen, I think, to share a little more about employer skills.
You can go ahead, Anna, and advance that to, I thought that this was useful, in our work with graduate students and postdocs. A lot of times we talk about that positional leadership, but other times it's looking at the things that you're already doing. So whether it's, doing research in your lab or being part of a volunteer organization, realizing that a lot of these top skills that employers are seeking are embedded into these things that you're already doing, whether or not you have a formal title in a leadership role. And so a lot of times I think technical skills are referenced a lot. And so I really wanted to show this so that people could see how many other skills are valued beyond technical. And looking at Anna's definition, so you see leadership as one, but then when you think about what you just said, ability to work in a team, problem solving skills, communication skills, that they all of them kind of revolve around this leadership concept. So I thought this was useful to highlight. It was a recent study that was done among the top skills that employers across a variety of industries are looking for.
Awesome. Thank you, Jen. And so this is a good one if you're someone who wants to take pictures with your phone instead of trying to write them all down. This is a good slide to take a picture of quickly. But next, we're going to talk about where you might already have gotten these skills. So Jen referenced that we talk about position and title as things that we think of for needing to be able to describe leadership in an interview or on a resume to be able to get that job. But there are a lot of other places that you all have probably gotten these. So I would encourage you first to consider leadership as relationships. When we think about leadership, it can't happen without other people. You can't lead other people without those people, right? It's kind of sounds silly to say, but it's not how we always think about it. So think about the relationships you have related to your work and other experiences, and that's where you may find some great examples to be able to talk about what you've learned about how to be a leader in that list of skills Jen shared. So let's brainstorm a little bit, take a moment as we walk through this and think of some of these experiences for yourself. Where have you worked with other people? So positionally, this might mean leading an organization, whether that was in a current situation or in an undergrad experience, organizing a conference, being a teaching assistant for a class, managing a lab. These are all things that might feel a little more tangible that you might already think, okay, that's leadership. I would also encourage you to think about things like being an engaged member in a group project, working with others in a restaurant job, volunteering in your community, and even planning like a family reunion, right? You don't have to talk in an interview and tell them that you're planning a family reunion, but you can say, I was working with a group of people to coordinate a big event and the interpersonal dynamics were very complicated. That might describe that for you. So think really broadly about where you've worked with other people to build those interactions and reflect on some of those as we go forward as well. Because I bet you have some skills that you've developed in those spaces that you wouldn't identify if you were only looking at specific titles. So as you think about those experiences, consider what worked well in them. What did you individually do well also? Sort of what worked well as a group, but what did you contribute that worked well? How do you communicate effectively or not communicate effectively with others? That communication piece is really important when we look at those employer desired skills, but it shows up in a lot of other things, not just under communication, but also what didn't work in that experience. What would you change during the process to make it better? And if you were to go back and do it over, what would you change, right? So a process of something, you might say, I'm supposed to manage this lab, and I think the check-in process didn't work well because people never cleaned up appropriately because we didn't follow up with them. Great. But what would you individually also do differently if you were to go do it over, right? I didn't really make sure I paid attention to people checking in. So that was something I needed to change in order to make that process more effective. Again, this is another one of those slides that I think is a great set of questions to take a quick picture of for yourself. And this may take some time for you to reflect on these things. You might not have amazing answers to them right now, and that's okay. Sometimes these are the things that, if they sit in the back of your mind for a little while, help you come up with better answers over time. So don't be afraid to sort of mull it over. I sort of talk about marinating with things for a little while, if that term works for you. It helps me to think about them and be creative when I go through that process. So now we're going to shift to how we talk about things on resumes and in interviews. And this is an example I see often from people on resumes of, well, I just led this meeting. I just supervised people. You did a lot more than those things. I'm confident. So I took some examples from my most recent job before this one, and gave sort of a bad undersharing example right here, right? These are really short. They're not specific. There's no results or impact from accomplishing any of these things. You don't know what I did, but I guarantee you there's a lot more behind those statements. And so it serves me better if I describe them a little better. So here you can see, I even had to edit these for space to fit a little more on the slide, but these are more accurate bullet points that I pulled from that resume. So versus advised 14 students, what I really did was recruit, hire, train, and supervise those students to help them prepare to plan, market, hire, and lead a major campus organization, right? That looks a lot different than advise 14 students. Tells them a little more about what I did, gives them some numbers, some results. Obviously, this is one bullet point from a longer description. Jen's example next will tell you a little more about how to sort of space that out. And then the second one that I offered was to lead planning meetings. That sounds really different than oversee 17 professional staff and student subcommittee chairs in planning of successful spring music festival with attendance of 7,000. That's tangible. It has some results. It has some more action words in there, specific tasks, and some skills used. So I'd just like to provide those examples to help you think about, if you're selling yourself short on that resume with those words, you might want to think about how to expand upon what you've done.
So for this next one, I think as grad students and postdocs, I would venture to guess that most of you are involved in research in some capacity. And pretty much every week when I'm working with students on polishing their resume, typically what I see is the research topic and the PI. So in this case, I got to make myself the PI or the advisor. So here I know who your PI is and maybe the topic of what you're researching, but it doesn't provide any more information about what you actually did. So Anna, if you go to the next set of bullet points, you may not need to include all of these, but really think through what is critical and important about that experience. So even for research, were you analyzing data using a certain type of software or using specific methods? Did you develop a novel approach or a new way of doing something or a better way of doing something? A lot of times I understand research can be tricky because the output is usually in a publication, but try to think more through, what else did you do? Did you manage a protocol? Did you manage students? Did you mentor them? You may have published or you may have presented. That could be communication skills. So again, breaking it down a little bit more to show the skills that you actually used, some results, being specific so that a stranger reading this really has a better understanding of what you mean when you say you're a graduate student researcher on this topic. So I thought that this was helpful. And again, not that you need to include everything, but definitely do try to break this down a little bit further. So things like TA or other things where you just might leave the title and assume that the employer or the reader knows what it is. Don't let them make any assumptions. Really be clear and specific about what you did. So I think at this time, we would like to give you a few minutes taking that information and coming up with one of the bullet points that you might already have on a CV or resume. We're encouraging you to think of it not just as a bullet point. I think of the resume bullet points as like, this is what anyone in this role should do, but think of transforming them more into accomplishment statements. What did you accomplish? And so a formula that you could use is below: an action verb, so very clearly describing what it is. So managed, presented, however you want to break that down. And then what was the activity or the project, or maybe it was the skills that you used, and include the results if at all possible. If you can quantify things, that's really helpful. And that kind of forms the basis of a more powerful accomplishment statement. So if this formula is useful for you, you can go with that. And let me just also provide a link in the chat to a section on our website where we have an action verb list and some sample accomplishment statements and some sample resumes. So you'll find some resumes for graduate students. So we want you to just take a few minutes now to kind of rework one of the bullet points that you already have in your resume. And so let me just look in the chat really quick for a question. Do you suggest that these elements should go in other places on the resume as well? Presentations, teaching experience. So good question. I think that if you're constructing a master version of your resume, I think more is more. Be updating it and put everything in the different places that it belongs. And then when you're going to apply to a specific opportunity, let's say it's a teaching focused position, you'll probably have a category that ties all that together, but you may also want to reference in your research that you also mentored or taught or something like that. So it could show up in multiple places, but I think it would just depend on the opportunity that you're using it for. Anna, do you have any feedback on that question?
Yeah, I think you summarized it well for what I would say also. Truly, it's also about where is it going to be most useful for that job. It's about tailoring it. Sort of Jen's reference of a master resume is incredibly accurate. As someone, 12 years into my career, I have a resume that is very long, that has everything on it. It is not the one that I use for every job. I take that and edit it down and maybe change some language or move and reprioritize things around that. I think it also depends on, was it part of the role that you did that, or was it extra? So there are times when I have to do presentations in my job, right? This is a presentation that's part of my job. There are also things that I volunteer to do at national conferences that I would list differently under there. In my previous role, I also had a part-time fellowship at the university that was listed. But then in addition to that, I volunteered to write a chapter in a book with one of my partners in that fellowship. But that was on top of it, right? So that publication was listed separately from that resume section that was about that specific fellowship. So it's also about where does it fit in there and figuring out for yourself what that looks like. But that's different depending upon what your job is and if you can categorize those things appropriately.
Yeah, so take just a minute or two. Again, that action verb list has categories that you can use. So if it's research or if it's a group project, so look at those different categories, and if nothing else, you're able to just make a tweak or two to one of the bullet points or descriptions. I think that could be a very useful takeaway. So we'll give you all just a minute or two to look at those materials and try to edit one of your own.
Jen, did we want to ask if anyone wanted to share theirs at all?
Yeah, sure. If anyone has recently done this, or if you are able to just now, if you're willing to, you could take yourself off mute, or put in the chat an edit or an upgrade that you were able to make. That would be helpful, I think, for the rest of the group. And or if anyone has a way that they have recently put together that they think is really useful, we could share that as well.
But also totally get it if folks are like, I'm eating my lunch and watching this and not working right now.
Again, you could take this information and use it going forward. Okay, great. Let's see. We have something in the chat. All right. And I have one bullet point for leading a cross-functional team consisting of process, mechanical, and automation engineers. Can you help me with putting into a better format? Okay. Do you want to take yourself off mute? Is that okay? We could kind of talk it out.
Hi, Jen. Thank you.
Hi, sure.
Hi. So yeah, I've been actually just working on my resume just before this webinar, so I'm really happy that I'm attending this. I have this, I'm a team lead at a plant here in Buchanan, New York, and my role is like as a team lead, I'm leading a team of a process engineer, mechanical engineer, and an automation engineer. So, and listening to your previous slide, I was looking through through the bullet points, and that sounded like, okay, I'm leading a team, but there's no like a story to it. So I just needed some help with that.
Sure. Anna, do you want to tackle it and I could chime in if I need?
Yeah, I would encourage you to think about leading a team, right, is a huge skill to be able to elaborate on. And are there ways that you can identify challenges of leading that team, especially since you're talking about people across different areas? Do you have to spend time translating between those folks, right? That sometimes in my work, if I'm talking to someone in one office and someone in another office, they don't always get what each other is doing. And my job leading that is to help them understand each other's language. Or because they sort of operate in different functional ways, they just perceive everything differently. And so sometimes I have to navigate the interpersonal piece of that and say, well, this person, their priority because of how they're prepared to do this work is one thing and your priority is another. And that's okay, but you need to be able to see each other. So are there ways that you have, managed the relationships between that team and help people problem solve in that? I bet that there probably are. And that's a great way to fill up that piece of the resume a little more. And have they achieved anything in that team, right? I'm sure they're working towards some end goal. Even if that goal is something as simple as keep it going. I think we underestimate the level of keep it going matters, right? And keep it functioning effectively matters. So some of that is stuff I would encourage you to start to think about in that question.
Okay. Yeah, that sounds great.
That's great. The only other thing that I would add to it is, again, with this idea of a master resume and kind of capturing as you go, but then exactly what Anna and I were saying, when you go to use this for your next opportunity, you might tailor it more. And so that could be a story that might point to a number of different things, or you might highlight a particular skill set. And so it might depend on the audience and who you're using it for as to what it is you want to extract and highlight, because I could see a number of different skill sets embedded into that. So that could be another thought too, is, depending on what it is you want to extract and highlight, you could reference that piece as well.
Okay. No, thank you. I'm going to start to redefine that entire bullet point. It looked great to me initially, because but right now I'm just, okay. Thank you very much, guys.
Okay, yeah, and thanks for chiming in. I think that helps the group too, in real time talk this out. So thank you for being brave enough to ask.
No, for sure. No, this is helpful. Thank you.
And I think that's a great example of sometimes we're underselling what we've done, right? leading a team, there's a lot of humans involved in that. Humans are going to be a challenge. So anything like that, you're doing a lot more than that one bullet point. But the other thing I would encourage folks to think of, if anyone else is in a similar situation, is think about what takes your time in that role. What is taking your time and energy? What is it that is taking your attention every day? Because it's probably not just emails, right? It's those people that you're dealing with. So what about them is taking that attention and time? And that is what you're doing. But that's a harder sort of meta level of thinking about it sometimes that we're not doing on a regular basis. But supervising people is a huge chunk of job, and being a team lead is a huge chunk of a job that is a really big step up. So considering what's taking your energy and attention is another way to sort of get a perspective on what that is. So related, we're going to talk about how to appropriately share things in interviews. And I'm going to give a sample not so great answer and talk about why and give a more useful version of that. I'm a little rusty since I haven't interviewed for a job in about 2.5 years. So forgive me, I've practiced a bit, but it is not at my tip-top shape. So the prompt I gave myself to answer is, tell me about a time you had to give feedback. That's a real leadership thing we might have to do if we're working with other people, whether it's because we're supervising them or not. So a not so great answer. So I worked with this group of students and they were hired in April every year. And then they helped put on events and big concerts, and I had to supervise 14 of them. And over the course of the year, they were evaluated in the middle of the year. The people that worked for them evaluated them. The people that were their peers evaluated them. And then the people above them evaluated them. And I met with them to talk through that, give them some advice and help them continue to move forward on those things. And, sometimes that was good feedback and sometimes it wasn't good feedback. So that was challenging. Sometimes people cried in that process, and you can see where that rambling is going. Well, it's rambling, first of all. There's a lot of details in there that you don't need to understand about what I was giving feedback on. It doesn't matter that they were planning concerts. It doesn't matter when they were hired. But those are things that when our brain starts to think about that kind of question, all of those pieces fire at once for us, and we pull out all of that information and share it. Whereas if we prepare, we can make it a little easier to follow. We can provide only the details that are necessary. And we'll talk about a model for that in a moment, but I wanted to give some examples so you could see the difference and then sort of lay that on top of that model that Jen's going to talk about. So a more appropriate answer for tell me about a time that you had to give feedback. The group of students that I supervised had an evaluation in the middle of their time, and this was a 360 evaluation process. In order to help that be really useful and deliver that information effectively, I also made sure the students completed a self-evaluation first. When we sat down to deliver that, I had them compare their self-evaluation with the summary of information that I'd compiled, so they could really appropriately understand how they were perceiving themselves and how others were. That comparison helped them then translate into effective results. For some students, they actually had really positive feedback, and it helped them build on those strengths. So giving them positive feedback was amazing to see their growth and improvement even in what they were delivering. For some students, that feedback was negative, of course. And from there, we could talk about tangible ways to build up plans for how to be better, examples of how that was happening, what they were doing that wasn't so great, and make a more solid plan moving forward. So we could check back in a month about where they were at with that feedback and how they were doing. So like I said, not my most organized answer in the world, but a little more focused, right? Little more concise description of that context, only of what was needed, only those necessary details, and some results about positive things and working forward on how we did that. I'll let Jen share the sort of structure that we have for this that's helpful. Here you go.
I thought that was great, Anna. I
have
thought
a question.
Oh yeah, go ahead.
Sorry to interrupt.
No, go ahead.
I was listening to what you were previously mentioning. I'm an international student, and when I am answering some questions, I think I ramble around a lot. maybe because it's my second language, or I don't know why exactly. And what helped me is to actually plan what I'm going to say.
Yes.
But on an interview is super, I don't know how to plan my answers if I don't know what exactly are they going to ask. Mm-hmm. So do you have any tips, or how can I stop rambling around when they are asking, for example, a question that I haven't planned for to reply?
Yeah, definitely. I'll jump in first, but Jen, please feel free also to share. So my method over time, and this was one that I sort of figured out accidentally, but I think is helpful. First of all, is to just imagine what some of the questions might be. And that can be looking at that job description and what are the top points that they're asking about. Obviously, you've met some minimum if they are interviewing you, right? So they've seen on your resume that you meet those minimum requirements. So what are the most important things in that job description that you think they're going to want to know more about? And a lot of that is often the soft skills. They can tell on your resume that you know how to do this tangible technical piece, right? You might need to talk about that a little bit. But obviously, if you have a degree in this field, you did something right? So thinking about some of those things that are harder to come across on just a resume on paper, such as, how did you work with others? Tell me about a time that you had a conflict with a colleague and how you navigated that. There's usually some good basics of that if you do some Googling about basic interview questions, and I bet Jen will share some resources on that too. But if you can imagine those questions, what I do first is write those down, and just like for me, it's typing on the computer that helps it flow, but whatever version of this is effective for you. Type up anything I can think of that answers that. Sort of brainstorming. I don't write it in sentences. I write it in bullet points for myself, whatever gets it on the page. And then I practice truly in the mirror, I'm not even joking, saying some of those answers. Because if I practice it enough times, I hear myself, and I hear if I'm rambling, and I hear, okay, I went in this direction instead of this direction. And I can look back at my notes and say, this is what I wanted to hit, these 3 points. And I eventually got there, but I didn't get there first. So the more I do that with things, and the more I practice that, it helps me be better prepared for even questions that I might not have anticipated. But I also do that around important things to me, right? So if I know this incident that happened was really impactful, I don't know that they're going to ask an answer or a question specifically about that incident, but I know that it was really big and mattered a lot. And if I have the details really clear in my head and I've talked about it a lot, it's easier for me to just pull the select details that might serve to answer something. So being really familiar with my experiences and having practiced talking through them a lot helps me then pull on them easier and sort of narrow it down a little bit. It's also totally okay to pause for a moment before that answer, because that helps you collect it a little bit. And not every interview answer is going to be absolutely perfect, but practicing and talking through those things just by yourself can help you feel better equipped and have the language ready around them first before you go into that interview. Other thoughts, Jen?
Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you, Deanna. Thanks so much for asking, because I think that it's a very common frustration. And so we appreciate your question. And Anna, I agree with everything that you said. Usually when I'm doing a mock interview with a student, we'll sort of work like a mind map. So you come up with these broader categories of, what do you think are the main buckets? What are the main skills or competencies that this employer is looking for? And so you can't prepare for everything. We've all heard of those crazy questions of, like, if you could be a tree or an animal, what kind would you be? And so some things are just going to be on the spot thinking. But I think if you can think in those broad categories, like Anna was saying, for the soft or transferable skills, you can start generating stories and examples that you might share for those if it comes up. And then the other thing, exactly, I agree with Anna, is to take a moment to collect your thoughts. Ask, say, that's a really great question. Could you give me just a second to get my thoughts together? Take a pause, take a breath, think through what you want to say. And the other thing that is helpful is, and this is funny for me because I'm a very literal person. So in interviews, when I'm asked a question, sometimes I take it very literally. And I always encourage students to think about, what is the bigger picture? Like, what is the bigger thing that they're trying to get at? So if they're asking you about a time that you failed or had a conflict or had a challenge, or what's your greatest weakness, that tends to throw people off a lot, because also you're nervous too, because you're interviewing. But if you can pause for a second and think, oh, they don't want me to just give them a story about failure. They're trying to see how resilient I am. They're trying to see if I'm able to learn and adapt in certain areas. So that would be my other recommendation, is to just try to think of what the deeper meaning of why they might be asking that question. And that might help you call upon a better response for it. And exactly.
Again, Jen.
Yeah, sure. I'm going to put 2 things in the chat. One that links to a comprehensive interview guide that we have on our website. And then this next one I'll reference towards the end, but we have a new tool for students. I'm not 100% sure if postdocs have access to this tool, but try it and see. And if not, let me know. But it's something called Big Interview. And there you can practice specific types of questions. So there is a section on leadership, and you can choose how easy or difficult, or the category of question. You can even choose if you want a rude recruiter or employer, or someone nice. And so you can kind of start and work your way up, but it's a great tool. You can record your responses and send it out to other people, or just watch it for feedback too. So that would be another tool that you could use. Yeah, and so I think as far as this framework for common questions, which you see up on the screen here, some of you may have heard about this STAR acronym, and those are going to be really useful to organize your response for things like, tell me about a time when, or give me an example of X. And so just as Anna went over in her not so great and much better response, you can use this, and you might even want to take a few examples of your own and write out a brief STAR response to some of those common skill-based or competencies that you think might come up in an upcoming interview. And so the thing that I think is really critical to focus on, that a lot of times people forget, is what is the action that you took? And maybe that's versus your team. So the employer wants to know, what did you do in this situation? And the other thing that I think people leave out is, what were the results? So I really loved in Anna's response that she didn't just end the story at, here's what I did, but she talked about what was the result, or what was the impact. Sometimes maybe there isn't a specific result, but you could talk about a lesson that you learned. So that could be really good for like a weakness or a challenge or failure type question. What are some of the lessons that you learned that you can carry forward? So again, you may have seen this acronym or framework, but I think that can be really useful for any of those behavioral questions where they want you to give an example or provide a story about a particular topic.
Awesome. Yeah, this structure I hadn't actually seen before Jen and I started working on this session. And then I was like, oh, this is perfectly makes sense for how I end up doing these answers sometimes. The other thing, if it's an opportunity that comes up in front of any of you, I would really encourage you to sit in on interviews as often as you can. If you get a chance to listen to someone interview for a job, take the opportunity. You will learn so much about how we come off and how we present ourselves by hearing someone else do it, which is why giving examples was important for us in this session, so that you could hear a little bit of how that sort of more rambling example from me versus a more cleaned up example sounded. But once you hear other people doing it, you will notice it so much more. So if there's ever an opportunity, if your department is hiring for someone or anything like that, to say, can I sit in? I really encourage you to take advantage of that, because it is well worth your time simply to absorb what you're hearing from folks. I always encourage that for anyone if you can. So just an extra tip to help you turn your interview ears on, as it were. It helps you turn that mirror on yourself. So that's sort of our structured piece. We have a couple of resources to share with you. So my office, the student leadership team, our website, if you do a quick Google search for Duke Student Leadership, we will be the first page that comes up. When you pull up that page on the left side navigation, there's a resources section and then quick takes training. This has trainings about, we have a shorter version of how to talk about your leadership on your resume on there, but also some different leadership structures, how to consider your values in leadership, etc. So it's a great little short section of resources, of pre-recorded videos, and some things you can download. This is also my email if you want to follow up and have some other questions about leadership resources and what we offer in our office. I'm happy to connect with anyone about those pieces.
And so I think I shared most of the resources that I wanted to. Our big interview tool, the guide that I put in the chat, that took you right to our resume and CV guide. And again, it has some action verbs that you can use, accomplishment statement, and resume examples. We also have some other guides on self-awareness, communication, internship, job searching. So those might be interesting to check out. And then for current graduate students, definitely encourage you to book an appointment using the link there, or just go to careerconnections.duke.edu. And you can meet with an advisor to talk through how to better communicate these on your resume, or do a mock interview, or if you want to seek out additional leadership experiences, that's something that we could help with too in an advising appointment.
Awesome. A quick page of some works cited. This is the book that I referenced where that leadership definition came from, and then those attributes that employers want if you wanted to look up more information. And then we'll also have some time for any questions folks have, but this is the end of the formal portion of the presentation. So if you're in a rush, you could probably dip out and feel like you got enough, but we'll stick around for some questions too.
Yeah, and just want to thank you so much, Anna, again, for sharing your time and your expertise with us today. I thought this was very valuable, and I'm sure our attendees do as well. So thank you. And sure, let's open it up to questions. You could take yourself off mute or put it in the chat, whatever you would like.
And thank you all for your time today as well and attention. We appreciate it.